All right, chicos. So right now, real quick, I want to review the pretérito perfecto, which we went over last class. Um, as you can see, it says it's what has happened. Now, it's got its point of reference is in the present tense. It's right now, and This happened sometime before now. Now, when exactly it happened is not that important. It's just that it happened before this point. Here are some examples. Mi jefe ha decidido que a partir de esta semana hay que comunicarse por internet y no gastar en llamadas internacionales. Okay, well, that's a lot there. But let's just focus on the first part. Mi jefe ha decidido. My boss has decided. So he has decided before this point. So before right now, he has decided. This decision's already been made before now. Now, if he decided this in 1972, or if he decided it right before this meeting started, whatever it is, it happened before now, and that's what matters. And it is exactly how we do it in English. When we say he has decided, my boss has decided, the same way we use that expression. This has happened. Juan has finished. So these things happened already, but before now. Now, right now, that might not seem all that interesting, but later on, we get into the pluscuamperfecto, our point of reference changes. So for right now, we're just saying this happened before now. But in order to do this, we conjugate in the present tense in the indicative of haber, has, ha, hemos, habéis, and han. And then we add a past participle to it. And our conjugation that's our conjugation. It is haber is conjugated, and then we add a past participle. Notice comprado doesn't change, bebido doesn't change, recibido doesn't change. It's always the same. And their conjugations are the only thing that changes. So really, this is kind of light lifting when you think about it, because you are just conjugating haber in the present tense. So you need to know 6 different forms. And then you need to know 1 participle form for every verb. So normally we'd have to know 6 unique forms for every verb, but really we just need to know 6 unique forms for 1 verb, haber in the present tense. And then we need to know 1 form for comprar, 1 form for beber, 1 form for recibir. So it really pays off knowing these conjugations, because it's a lot less work. So that's the idea of the present perfect, as they call it in English, or pretérito perfecto, as I prefer to call it in Spanish. The participles is what's very important here. So any of these irregularities that we learned about before, where you have the extra accent mark there, caído, leído, oído, construido, does not have an extra accent mark because of that UI blend. But we learned these rules last time, and then we had all these irregular forms. These same irregularities, 100%, these same irregularities that happen with our first conjugation of pretérito perfecto are going to have the same participles in all these perfect forms. So when we get into pluscuamperfecto eventually, or today in just a minute, I'm going to go over the pretérito perfecto del subjuntivo, same participles. So we have escrito here, he escrito, has escrito, ha escrito, hemos escrito, habéis escrito, han escrito. When we get into the pretérito perfecto de subjuntivo, still escrito in all 6 forms. So again, as we put in that, when we're trying to learn these, we learn the 1 participle for every verb, the 6 forms of haber, and now that form that we already learned for escribir is the same form that we already know when we move on into the other perfect tenses. So as I said, we're going to get into the subjunctive of this. So before we had the present tense of the indicative of haber in each form. Now we're going to use the present subjunctive of haber. So we had a was the indicative conjugation, the present tense of haber. Haya is the subjunctive equivalent. So what we just did with the pretérito perfecto, the indicativo, we're doing the same thing with the subjuntivo. Only thing that changes is now we use the subjunctive equivalent for each of those. So we had has cerrado for cerrar in the to form. Now we've got hayas cerrado. Instead of ha cerrado, we'll have haya cerrado if we have a subjunctive trigger. Instead of hemos cerrado, we'll have hayamos cerrado. Instead of habéis cerrado, we'll have hayáis cerrado. Instead of han cerrado, we'll have hayan cerrado. So that's the only thing that's different is instead of using the present indicative, we use the present subjunctive of haber. So the only thing that's additional, the only new information that you have with this topic is this right here, the conjugations of haber in the subjunctive. So the participles you learned with the pretérito perfecto, those are the same participles now. The only thing that is new is to learn an entire new mood or tense, whatever you want to call it, is this right here, this column of the 6 different conjugations. The only thing that's different about this entire idea. So if you already knew how to conjugate pretérito perfecto, you need to learn these conjugations, and now you'll know how to do that in its subjunctive equivalent. So the uses are the same as we had before, where if you had whatever your form was, like here, Luis me dijo que ha dejado de ver ese programa. He told me he has stopped watching the show. He told me that he has stopped. He has stopped, meaning before this moment, he has stopped doing this. So he, again, this happened anytime before now, as we've already talked about this. Let's go look at the subjunctive equivalent. Me alegro de que Luis haya dejado de ver ese programa. So we have pretty much the same conjugation, the same verb, and everything is the same. It translates the same. You see that he has stopped, or Luis has stopped watching the show. He has stopped watching the show. Translates pretty much the same way. But notice the conjugation. The verb went from ha dejado to haya dejado. So we are using the subjunctive here, even though it means the same thing, only because we've got this verb of emotion as a subjunctive trigger to start off. So we've got me alegro de que, I'm happy that, or I'm glad that. And we have emotion. We have a change in subject because we have yo here and Luis here. So we use the subjunctive. So the same reasons we use the subjunctive for all the other stuff in the present tense is what we're using it for now. Verbs of influence, verbs of doubt, verbs of emotion. If you see the personal bias within personal expressions, all that same stuff. We would also have it with adjective clauses, adverbial clauses, same exact uses. And that's when we would use the subjunctive. Just now we're using it with anytime we want to say that this has happened. We have studied, but we're going to have something that would force us to use the subjunctive before it. So next up, I wanted to revisit those irregular participles. Here are some of the more common ones out there. So again, those participles you learned before, the past participles that is, these are the same words throughout. So if you know what this form is, and yeah, it's irregular and they're kind of hard to remember at first, but there's a lot of payoff in that when you know this one form. So we're going to know abrir in the past participle is. That same form is going to be the one that we use in the pretérito perfecto, the pretérito perfecto de subjuntivo, pluscuamperfecto de subjuntivo, futuro perfecto, condicional perfecto. So we're going to use this same exact word over and over. So let's take a look. We've got first abrir, and I'm just going to do like a little quiz with you, and you just see if you can come up with a participle, and then I'll show it to you. And it is abierto. So again, abierto, that is the form that we use over and over again. So if you learn it once, yeah, it's a weird one, but you just have to learn the one form, and then you've got it for several forms. All right, so here I am. I actually opened up abrir in SpanishDict.com just to show you the conjugations. And you can see we got the present, the preterite, and all the different forms we had to learn of abrir. Again, here's the present indicative. You got this form, this form, this form. We got 6 different forms here. And then we got the same for each of those other tenses. Let's go down to the subjunctive. We got all the different forms of the subjunctive, you know, in each of these. And then commands, progressives, and this is similar to what we're doing with the perfect tenses, the progressives. We got abriendo throughout. Now let's take a look at the perfects. There's that word I was just talking about, abierto, A-B-I-E-R-T-O, that same word we just went over. That's the same form that's in each of these conjugations. Here we got it in all the different types of perfects that we're going to learn, even down here, the subjunctive. This is what we went over last class, the he abierto, has abierto, ha abierto, etc. And then go down. This is what we're learning right now. Hay abierto, hayas abierto, etc. So I'm not kidding when I say this is really useful. Learning this, the one word abierto, can kind of save your butt if you're a little bit stuck when you're writing, you're trying to conjugate, or when you're speaking even, and you can't remember how to conjugate maybe abrir in the preterite. You can go with this one, with the the pretérito perfecto here. So really, really useful, because we can also use it with the future perfect. I will have opened. I would have opened. I had opened. It will be useful. All right, but let's get back to the quiz, because I know that's what you're here for. Cubrir, what's the participle become? And again, we're just quizzing yourselves, and it is cubierto. If you know cubrir is cubierto, in a second we're going to get down to descubrir. I bet you already know what that one's going to be. Decir is going to become dicho, así. Descubrir. This we've got cubrir with a prefix in front of it. We had cubierto there, so this time we've got descubierto. Okay, escribir. We actually talked about that earlier in the lesson. Comes escrito. Describir is not on here, but that's descrito. Satisfacer, satisfecho. Hacer becomes hecho. And I know these are like, they look crazy, but they are really, they apply to lots of different conjugations. So learn the one word, go back to like hacer in the preterite. Hice, hiciste, hizo with a Z, hicimos, hiciste, hicieron. It's all sorts of weird. Hecho is weird too, but it's just one form, and it's going to be what you can use in several conjugations. All right, moving on. Morir becomes muerto. Poner becomes puesto. Romper becomes roto. Resolver becomes resuelto. Ver becomes visto. And if I'm going too fast, you could always pause the video, but this is about the pace I'm going to keep up for the next handful. Volver becomes vuelto. If we have revolver, like to revolve, to spin, we get revuelto. Like huevos revueltos comes from that. Freír becomes frito. It also does have a regular form that exists, freído, just frito is more common. Elegir, the irregular form, is electo, and the regular form, well, it just follows the regular rules, elegido. Those are both used pretty often. Imprimir, we've got the imprimido. We do have a regular form of this one, but we also have the irregular participle impreso. Bendecir, maldecir are connected. They actually do not follow the decir rule. This is the, I can't think of any other exceptions to the rule like this, but it is not going to be dicho in there. It's, well, bendecido and maldecido both exist, but also probably more common is to hear bendito and maldito. Así. And you can see what all the meanings of these words are too. So these are the participles. So I gave you the infinitive meaning over here, like to open. But we know abierto will be more like opened, covered, told or said, discovered, written, satisfied, made or done, dead or died. These can be, they might translate a few different ways depending on how it's used. Put, placed, broken, resolved, seen, returned, fried, chosen, elected, printed, blessed, cursed. And that's what you're normally going to think of these as, whether it's, I have written, I had written, I will have written, and the same deal with any kind of subjunctive trigger you'll have to use, but it's the same word, escrito, regardless. And I know it probably seems that I'm being really repetitive with all this, but it is really repetitive. These are the participles that you're going to use for all these conjugations. All the ones that I just showed you a little bit ago from abierto. So I guess I don't mind being repetitive because that's kind of the idea of this. Just trying to, also it's something we haven't worked with very much, not in a couple of years, and I'm just trying to get it back in your minds. We actually got pretty good at this from what I remember a couple of years ago, and I think we'll still get pretty good at, we'll be good at this, and we can use this on our writing in paper 1. And then of course you're going to come across this word. Now these words, of course, with all the irregulars we've got here, but the regulars are also useful. And a lot of times you'll see these words in other forms, but if you know the participle and you know what the verb means, and you see es un descubierto, in that case, it doesn't mean discovered. It means a discovery, un descubierto. And you see something like escrita. You might see the word escrita, something related, and it's probably written as an adjective. You might see un puesto. Un puesto is it's a job, a placement, a position at your work. It's un puesto. So you'll see other forms of these words, or you might see the exact same word in different contexts, but it's not used as a past participle. And when that happens, if you've never seen the word before and used in this way, you might recognize that un dicho, it's related to decir, even though I don't know what it is. I haven't seen this as a noun before, but now you come across it when you're reading and you see un dicho, you might, I'm not exactly sure what it means, but I know that dicho comes from decir, which is to say or to tell. So maybe I'm thinking that it's a saying. It is. So if you know these words, not only is it useful for what we're doing with our verbs, but it's also useful when it comes to just trying to learn more words, different word forms. And, and again, because we might use these a lot of these are used as adjectives along with them as past participles, but they'll agree. So they might look a little bit different, but we can find those connections. All right, well, this is where I'm going to stop the video. And again, hopefully you're starting to see the value in learning these conjugations.